This is the best Bloodlands build ever made, and the best part, it doesn't require any uber uniques. Don't believe me? Well, a few days ago, I put out a video explaining how Bloodlands, when combined with Black River, would be an incredibly powerful build, and a lot of people really took to that idea, including a content creator named Ponyhoof, who created his own build around my idea. Now, this build is very unoptimized, and I'm going to show you how much better the build can be when it's perfected. You can see that for Nightmare Dungeons, my build has way more movement speed, so it's able to quickly move from pack to pack. On top of that, it has 50% more attack speed than his version does, meaning that you're able to dish out damage ridiculously fast, but despite that, the Bloodlance overpowers are still doing the same amount of damage. On top of that, the corpse explosions in this version are hitting much harder, about 50% harder than in his version, and you can see that, the build moves faster, it does more damage, and it attacks faster, and the corpse explosions do more damage. Overall, this build is just better. Now, you might be asking, what about single target? Well, he didn't post single target in his video, I assume because his wasn't that good, but you can see in this clip here, in this last 10% of the boss's life, and you compare that to the 60% that I chunked off of Duriel here, you can see that my version most likely kill bosses way faster, but I don't have a good point of comparison. This build has a very cool engine that drives it. I'm excited to talk about it. And remember, this is the no Uber version. Every single clip that you see is with no Ubers. If you have any Ubers, this build is going to be way stronger than even what you're seeing on the screen. So what is the main engine of how the build is working? Well, we're going to be using the Embalmer's aspect, which is going to make us spawn a Blood Orb whenever we consume a corpse, at least 30% chance to. Then we're going to be running the Black River aspect, so that whenever we corpse explosion, it consumes 5 corpses. So we're getting 5 rolls on Embalmer whenever we corpse explosion. Then we're running the Sacrilegious Soul, which is going to be auto-casting corpse explosions. So you can see how this is working, right? We're going to be killing enemies, corpse explosions are going to get automatically casted, then those corpses are going to spawn Blood Orbs, and those Blood Orbs have a ton of synergies with Bloodlance. So for starters, we have the Core Quills aspect, which is going to constantly be sucking in Blood Orbs every time we cast Bloodlance. And those Blood Orbs are going to be casting extra Blood Lances that are going to help us ramp a lot faster in AoE. On top of that, those Blood Orbs are going to be reducing the cooldown on our key passive, Rathma's Vigor, and then it's going to be giving us a lot more overpowers per second. So you can see how this engine already makes the build get way more overpowers per second, while also getting giant Black River corpse explosions constantly nuking the entire screen. That's what makes this build so freaking strong. In terms of gear, on our helmet, we're going to be running the aspect of Shielding Storm, which is going to be making our Bone Storm constantly give us barrier. Now, if you do have Harlequin is better, but the Shielding Storm is going to give us a ton of survivability, and on our helmet, we can roll total armor, cooldown reduction, intelligence, and then some other random stat. On our chest, we're going to be running the Mutilator Plate. Now, this is mostly for the 20% damage multiplier as well as the Fortified generation. Obviously, that's the main point of this unique, but remember, this unique has really weak stats on it, so it can be pretty rough. So what you need to do is you need to get total armor rolls on as many pieces of gear as possible so that you're still able to armor cap despite having like Mutilator Plate and missing out on Juggernaut. On our gloves, we're looking for attack speed, crit chance, all stat, and ranks of Bloodlance. And then we're going to be putting the Core Gwills on them so that we can constantly suck in those Blood Orbs to get extra casts of Bloodlance and reduce the cooldown of Rathma's Vigor for more overpowers. And those Blood Orbs are going to heal us, and they're going to fortify us. So those Blood Orbs are doing everything. It's pretty amazing in this build. And the pants, like we talked about, is running the Embalmer, and we're going to be wanting total armor percent and then 3 damage reduction stats on our pants. On our boots, we want intelligence, movement speed after killing an elite, and essence cost reduction. All 4 of those rolls are very important. Actually, your boots are a very important slot in this build. And we're going to be running the Wind Strikers aspect for movement speed after dealing critical strikes. On our weapon, we're going to be running the Black River. As we discussed, this item already has a ton of synergies in the build, but there's even more that we haven't discussed yet. But the main idea of the Black Rivers is going to be consuming corpses, and then those corpses are going to be doing insane damage because of the Black River scaling, and they're going to be creating Blood Orbs. And remember, the Black River also has some really good passives on it, giving us ranks of Fueled by Death and Hued Flesh. So this ends up being an incredibly powerful item. On our necklace, we're running the aspect of Grasping Veins with movement speed, cooldown reduction, amplified damage, and then ideally essence cost reduction. On our ring, we're looking for lucky hit chance, maximum life, max essence, resource generation, and we're going to be running the aspect of Rathma's Chosen. This is going to give us the 50% increased attack speed after we overpower. And remember, we have so many sources of overpower that we're going to get 100% uptime on this. The faster we attack, the more blood orbs we're going to eat, and the more overpowers we're going to get per second. So this ends up being an extremely important aspect in the build, and this is where you see that 50% attack speed coming in that the other version of the build is missing. As we already discussed, we're going to be running the Sacrilegious Soul, and then we're finally going to be running Lidless Wall. Now remember, Lidless Wall is going to give us a huge amount of survivability. It's going to give us uptime on Bone Storm for increased crit chance and damage reduction. This is just an amazing aspect. We do have a couple of items that we're going to swap out for the boss that's going to increase our single target by a ton. Now, you don't need to do this swap. This version of the build will still kill bosses just fine, but if you just swap a couple of items, you're going to massively increase your boss damage. So the two items you want equipped are Blood Moon Breeches and the Banished Lord's Talisman. Those two alone are going to like double the speed at which you kill bosses, and if you feel like it, you can also equip the aspect of Untimely Death in replacing Black River, and you can equip the aspect of Grasping Veins on your offhand instead of Lidless Wall. And those changes are going to massively increase your single target, but like I said, the two most important ones are the Blood Moon Breeches and the Banished Lord's Talisman. Now before we get into the skill tree, and the skill tree is pretty damn cool, first we need to talk about the construct, because the construct is a very important piece of the build. We're going to be running the Genesis, Duration Support, Tactical Support, Flash of Adrenaline for 100% uptime on 50% damage. This is part of what makes every build this season so freaking strong, is because we're getting this huge 50% damage buff on every build. Now on the other side, we're going to be running Tempest with Resource Support, Evernight, and Breaking Support. Now you can choose between Breaking Support and, what is it called? And Safeguard Support. Both of these are very good, it just depends on what you want. Breaking Support is going to give you uptime on Vulnerable, Safeguard Support is going to give you damage reduction. So you should pick which one you want based on how things are going for you. Now the skill tree for this build is interesting, and we have another swap here for the boss, but we don't ever change our skill tree, we don't ever change our Paragon board, we don't change anything besides those couple of gear things for bossing. So this skill tree, it's going to be a little bit weird because we're taking some skill points that we don't necessarily always use. So the first thing is the Reap with Enhanced Reap and Acolyte's Reap for corpse generation. When you're bossing, you definitely want Reap on your bar, and you're going to be replacing Blood Mist with Reap for the corpse generation so that we're able to easily kill bosses because we're spawning the corpses for the corpse tendrils. We're going to be putting 5 points into Bloodlance, going to Supernatural Bloodlance so that our Bloodlances spawn health blood orbs, and it's going to give us guaranteed overpower. So this is a really important piece of the build. 3 points into Huge Flesh for the corpse generation for, corpse tendrils and corpse explosions and all of that. Then we're going to be taking Blood Mist, Enhanced Blood Mist, and Dreadful Blood Mist for the 10% crit chance after Blood Mist ends. You can take Ghastly Bloodlance instead and permanently drop Sever, and that's going to give you the corpse generation needed in single target, but I generally suggest that you run Dreadful Blood Mist. Then we're going to be running Grim Harvest. Now you can technically swap around Grim Harvest and put more points into it if you're having trouble with Essence. So like if your construct is really low level, I would suggest that you drop some of the points in Fueled by Death and instead put them into Grim Harvest so that you can have more Essence generation. But we're also going to be putting 2 points right now into Fueled by Death for the damage multiplier. Now this is a very important piece of the build, and it's part of the build that was missed in the earlier version we discussed earlier, which is that you need 5 points into Corpse Explosion so that it can actually deal damage. Obviously more ranks of skills massively increases the damage, and Corpse Explosion is an important piece of the build. Now in single target this isn't going to do anything, but like I said, this build is designed to easily swap between single target and AoE. I didn't want to make it overly complicated, so we're just going to leave all of our points in Corpse Explosion even when bossing. And remember, we're taking Plagued Corpse Explosion because of the massive AoE from Black River, and it's also going to have a ton of extra damage multipliers on it that the Blighted Corpse Explosion doesn't bring. Plus, it's going to make it do physical damage, and when we get into the Paragon board and stuff, you're going to see we've got some multipliers for physical damage. So it ends up being the best option by far. We're also running Death's Embrace. Again, for bossing, technically Death's Reach is better, but Death's Embrace gives us the damage reduction we need, and a lot of times we just want to walk up to the pack and just kill it. We don't want to mess with being far away and all that stuff. We just want to get in there and kill stuff. So that's why we're running Death's Embrace. Then we're running Amplified Damage for a massive damage multiplier against cursed enemies. We're running Decrepify, Enhanced Decrepify, Abhorrent Decrepify. So Decrepify, remember, massive damage reduction, especially if you have Harlequin. and it's going to reduce all of our cooldowns by 1 second as we hit enemies, so it's very strong. Over here, we're putting 1 point into Gruesome Mending, 3 points into Collects Blood for the 18% multiplier, and then 3 points into Tides of Blood for the 30% damage multiplier as long as we're healthy. So it's very important to keep your health up in this build because we're going to be getting 30% damage from this, as well as 18% damage from Collects Blood. And remember that our overpower scales with our health. So you can see it's very important to keep your HP up. And so, this is partly why the Blood Orb generation is so good. We're also going to be running Corpse Tendrils, going to Blighted Corpse Tendrils for the Blood Orb generation. And that's going to make us spawn extra health Blood Orbs. And remember, we've got Sacrilege auto-casting Corpse Tendrils, so we're actually getting a ton of free Blood Orb generation very frequently. And then when we manually cast it, of course, Blood Orbs. 3 points into Inspiring Leader for 12% attack speed, 3 points into Standalone for the damage reduction, and 3 points into Memento Mori for crit chance and overpower damage multipliers. These are all very good. And you can see that the build ends up being pretty damn tanky. It's a very tanky build, and part of that is because the more tankiness you have, the less health you lose, which is really important for keeping up our buffs. So that's why you're going to see a lot of survivability in this build. Finally, we're going to be taking Rathma's Vigor, which is going to give us guaranteed overpowers. And remember, the Blood Orbs are going to reduce the cooldowns on those overpowers. Something that's important to note is that Blood Orbs heal you for a percentage of your maximum life. So it becomes really important to get a lot of maximum life so that you can heal and proc this faster. Our Book of the Dead is pretty standard, but the Paragon board is really interesting. And at the end of the video, I'm going to have a couple of tips and tricks for you. So we're going to be running Skirmishers for the increased crit chance. We're going to be running Bone Mages for the increased overpower damage, and then we're going to be running Iron Golem for the increased crit damage. You might be thinking Blood Golem, but Iron Golem is going to also increase the damage of the Corpse Explosion. So Iron Golem ends up being a lot better. As we get into the Paragon, I also want to mention that we recently launched our membership program here on YouTube, and it would really mean a lot if you could support us. We're working really hard to get these videos out, and unfortunately we still got to pay rent and we still got to buy food. So if you guys really like the content, feel free to join as a member, but don't feel like you have to. But let's get into the Paragon board and start talking about it. So we're going to be running Amplify in the first board to buff these armor nodes. Remember, we don't have Juggernaut or Disobedience, so this armor is very important. And then Amplify is going to be giving us a 10% damage buff. Coming up here, we're going to be taking Control, and this is going to give us 20% damage against CC'd enemies, which remember, Corpse Tendrils is going to be doing constantly. Bloodbath is going to give us a 35% damage multiplier on Overpower, which is super important. Corporeal is going to give us 10% physical damage, which that's going to be hitting the Corpse Explosions and the Blood Lances, so that's pretty nice. And then we're going to be running Scent of Death, because remember, Black River's Sacrilege is going to be eating like every corpse, so there's going to be 15% damage. Coming over here, we're going to be taking Blood Begets Blood for a 15% damage multiplier. Obviously, we're generating tons of Blood Orbs. And then we're going to be taking Dominate for a 12% multiplier after we overpower enemies, and a massive additive damage for our overpower, which ends up being really freaking strong. We're actually taking extra willpower here, just because of how strong that glyph is. Coming over here, we're going to be taking Flesh Eater. And remember, Black River, 5 corpses, Flesh Eater, 5 corpses. So this is going to give us almost 100% uptime on 40% damage. Then we're going to be taking Blood Drinker, so that as we suck in those Blood Orbs, they're going to be giving us Fortify. And Fortify is a very important piece of this build, as it's going to massively increase our overpower damage. For the tips, if you decide to play this build, remember, if you Corpse Tendrils and then immediately go into Blood Mist and then cancel the Blood Mist, the enemies will get Corpse Tendrilled in at the same time that you get the 10% crit chance from Blood Mist. So this can end up being a very nice damage multiplier, especially if you find that you're short on damage, like if your gear isn't as good and whatnot. So definitely try that combo out. For the second tip, remember, we discussed this already, but it's really important. You need to keep your health up as high as you can, and as part of that, you need to keep up your Fortify. This is going to give you a massive damage multiplier. So do your best to keep your life up. Potion is actually used as a damage dealer, right? We're trying to keep our life capped all the time. The last 2 tips I'm going to give you are to keep up Decrepify and keep up Bone Storm. Remember, we're running Lidless Wall, so we need to hit enemies to keep up Bone Storm. And then for Decrepify, we're going to get this massive damage reduction, and it's also going to increase the uptime on Bone Storm. All right, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys like this version of the build. Let me know what you think of it in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.